Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is John Leonard. I'm chairman of the Milton Board of Appeals. The first hearing that we have scheduled for this evening, August 5th, 2021, at 7 o'clock is the residences at East Milton application. And we have heard from all parties to this particular matter. And because they need additional time to confer with peer reviewers and to have certain paperwork and plans prepared for the meeting, it has been suggested that this meeting be continued from this evening, August 5th, 2021, to August 12th, 2021 at 7 p.m. By agreement of the parties. And so I don't believe that the residences council is present this evening, but there's no discussion, no evidence to be had with respect to this particular application. So it's going to be continued by consent of all of the parties until August 12, 2021 at 7 p.m. in the evening. So with nothing further to be dealt with at this meeting is now adjourned, and we'll commence the Ice House application at 7:10 this evening, which is about 7 or 8 minutes from now. So the East Milton residence is now adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Board of Appeals Chapter 40B hearing, continued hearing on the Ice House application. The date of this hearing is August 5, 2021, and it's approximately 7:30 in the evening. My name is John Leonard, and with me today are fellow board members Brian Conley and Virginia Donahue King. And the purpose of this continued hearing is to discuss several topics and get a status report as to how we're doing on several other matters. We have waivers, statutory waivers to discuss, and we have received basically an email from Chief Madden of the Milton Fire Department expressing certain concerns regarding the ingress and egress of fire trucks and equipment to the property. Let me just ask Judy Barrett, is there any other major issue to discuss?
No, I mean, the big matters are reviewing and acting on the waivers and the conditions, having a discussion about those. The rest of the decision, can be cleaned up later, but the fire chief's concerns, I'm not sure they can be addressed with conditions. That's the problem.
Well, that may be very, very true. Well, let's do the fire chief first, in the sense that it may be the easiest to either dispose of or have it continue to another date. The fire chief was Christopher Madden. Sent an email to Mr. Serwinski of the Milton town planner, dated August 4th at around 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and he was expressing concern after looking at the plans for the ice house as to whether there would be adequate access for a ladder truck to access the property and then to maneuver on the property. And he certainly attached 3 or 4 different schemes showing the access in the property and all of that. Judy, do you know whether the applicant has had an opportunity to confer with their architect and possibly a traffic engineer on some of these issues that are raised by Chief Madden?
I don't, since this all just happened, I did speak with Sean Reardon about it. And he was going to attempt to reach the fire chief. I don't know that he did, because I think he would have let me know.
Mr. Leonard, sorry, Judy. My understanding is that Chief Madden and Mr. Bosworth spoke this afternoon, so Mr. Bosworth may have some color on this.
Okay, Mr. Bosworth, do you want to speak to that issue, or do you want to defer to Mr. Golding, and I can ask Mr. Golding to bring us up to date?
No, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to speak to it. I did speak with Chief Madden earlier today and to address his concerns in his letter. And he did mention that he was going to send an email to Mr. Zawinski. I don't know if he did later on this afternoon, but he said if he didn't, that I could outline our conversation. Chief Madden had a couple of questions regarding the access to the project in the width of the driveway openings. And we can address the southern driveway opening because we've squeezed that down to 12 feet. The roadway itself is 20 feet wide. So we can spread that opening another 8 to 12 feet without any impact to the project. And as I outlined with Chief Madden, the southern road entrance is dedicated to emergency vehicles only. So not only do they have enough room to get their truck down there, but they also have access to the foyer from the south side driveway. The other question that arose was ambulatory access to the parking lot at the front door, where the L meets on the building. And I've asked our civil engineer to see if we can shift the islands, squeeze them down a couple of feet and shift the parking slightly to the east. That would allow a little bit wider access to the drive lane in the front parking lot. It is important to note that the design that we've provided to the board does meet the NFPA requirements. And there's a page in the plan documents that we provided that show the swing radius of the town's fire apparatus. And Chief Madden did have a good point. He wanted to try and limit the time that the fire apparatus would be traveling into an oncoming lane, for example. So I believe that we can satisfy his concerns with A, widening the drive lane openings a little bit and shifting the parking in the parking lot slightly to the east. And I believe that will satisfy his concerns.
Okay. And do you have a reasonable time estimate as to when plans can be prepared to show to the chief and to include as part of the application?
Yes, I think we can have new plans to him by the end of next week. And I intend to meet with him to go over the new layout. It's not going to be a new layout. It'll be a new NFPA program-driven fire apparatus access. But he will be able to see them by the end of next week.
Okay, that's great, because according to my notes, it will require additional hearings on this particular application. And I think the target date would be the 19th of August. Today's the 5th.
Yeah.
The 12th, we're going to have the East Milton application, and we'd be back on this application on the 19th. So that should give us sufficient time to deal with that issue.
That should work. And then, if there's any lingering comments on the conditions or whatever, I could probably have a clean decision for the board well in advance of that meeting.
Okay.
Probably, I'm just going to need the plan dates and so forth for reference in the decision.
Okay, that's great. Let me just ask my board members. Mr. Conley, do you have any questions regarding this issue and questions of Mr. Bosworth?
No, I mean, thank you for meeting with the fire chief to try to find a resolution. I'm just trying to picture the shifting in the parking lot. Is it fundamentally going to look the same in terms of we had some discussion about the benefit of the islands and the trees in the parking lot. So is it just a matter of moving things a couple of feet from one direction to the other, or is it changing the look and feel of the landscaping and the parking area?
No, Mr. Conley, it probably won't even be noticeable to the eye.
Great. Okay. No further questions. Thank you.
Mrs. King, do you have any questions on this issue?
Yes, I do. I was just wondering if Chief Madden is going to have an opportunity to pass judgment on the changes that we're addressing right now. I just want him to be able to sign off on it, I guess is what I'm saying.
Oh, I think that's wise and it's necessary. Let me do this. Do you have any further questions, Jenny?
No.
Okay, because why don't we'd have a week more or less for the chief to review the revised plans, and presumably that would be with Tim Zawinski. So Tim, do you have any comments on this procedure we're setting up for Chief Madden?
No, I think this will be fine, especially since Mr. Bosworth has already been in contact with Chief Madden and plans to and plans to meet with the chief once the designs are done. I think there'll be, plenty of time for him to, assuming that the solution is satisfactory, which I think, based on Mr. Bosworth's description, it seems like there's an eminently doable solution to this problem. We should have whatever sort of confirmation the board feels it needs from the chief, we can get. I think, hopefully a written correspondence would be fine. But if you want him to come in and attest to that fact, I'm sure he'd be happy to do that.
Yeah, my feeling is that written consent of the chief would be all that would be required here.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay. Do you have anything else, Tim, that you want to add on this particular issue?
No, I just want to say I appreciate the development team kind of tackling this with the speed and the efficiency that they have. Chief Madden has been kind of in contact with the state code enforcement team to kind of assist him in evaluating these projects. So the feedback from him maybe took a little bit longer than I think we would have hoped for, which is fine. We want to make sure that he's comfortable and he's getting things right. So but I do appreciate the development team's flexibility and speed on this one, because it is a really important issue. And it's whenever these things kind of come up at 11:59 on the clock, I always kind of cringe. But I think everyone's being very cooperative and is really doing their best. So I just want to, again, thank the development team for acting on this, and hopefully we can get this done quickly and efficiently, and we'll be still on schedule.
Great. Thanks, Tim. I certainly second your observations and your comments. Mr. Golding, do you have anything else you want to add on this particular issue of the chief's concern about some access issues?
No, Mr. Chairman, I think Mr. Bosworth adequately summarized kind of what the development team has done. So hopefully, I think by the next hearing, I think we'll have all this resolved.
Great. Thank you very, very much, Bev. Do we have any members of the public who have indicated they have any questions on this aspect of the case? No. Okay. That's fine. So let's turn our attention to the waivers, and Judy, what in your opinion is the best way to attack the issue of these waivers? Maybe you can tell us where they stand and whether there've been discussions with Mr. Golding, because we certainly know that
John, I think
there's been a slight interruption here because of vacations. So go ahead, Judy. Why don't you pick up?
No, it's fine. I mean, so Attorney Golding and sent a draft. He made some changes to it, sent it back. I, of course, then couldn't find my most recent copy, which he gladly sent today. And I think he's probably the best bet to kind of walk you through this, but I have gone through it. It seems to me that what they need, they've requested, I'm not going to make an opinion that they've caught every regulation in town that they need a waiver from. That's really their problem. But I think the big stuff is here. So I'm going to defer to him. And and also if Tim wants to weigh in on any sort of regulatory matters here, I think that's fine. But Attorney Golding, I think this is really your show.
Okay, that makes sense. So what, Scott? Why don't you run through? I should just say to the members of the public, these waiver requirements and requests are set forth on a 3 or 4 page document, which has been filed with the board, and it's been online now for a couple of weeks at least. So, Scott, do you want to run through these waivers and
Sure, absolutely, and I'll thank you.
As less technical as you can, so that people will understand where we're going.
Yeah.
Then what I'd do when you finished your first waiver, for example, Tim, if you have a copy of this in front of you, perhaps you could indicate whether you're in agreement with that or have any questions. So why don't you start, Scott?
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So what I'll do is I'll just kind of run through each of these waivers one by one. So the first waiver we're seeking is from section 3A of the zoning bylaw, and that's for district uses. And essentially the regulation or requirement is that there's no apartment or multifamily residential units and no use as a store or shop or for manufacturing or commercial purposes. That is the requirement or the regulation. We are proposing to have a mixed use development with 52 unit multifamily residential and 2 commercial spaces, and to allow for parking for and access to adjacent town-owned lands. So that's essentially a waiver from the residential district use to allow for the project to be constructed and utilized.
And Tim, do you have any comments you want to make on that first requested waiver?
No comment. That's all correct.
Okay, how about the second one, Scott?
The second waiver is from section 3B3, which regards signs within the residential district. There is a requirement or a regulation that no permanent sign of any type is allowed in any residential zone within the town. We're proposing that we be allowed to have a site identification sign set back 6.1 feet from the front lot line.
All right, and Tim, do you have any comments?
Just a question, and I don't unfortunately have the zoning right in front of me. Is that also, and this may be in a future waiver, is this the section that requires, well, I mean, you're not allowed to have the sign in the first place, but is this the section that requires you to get approval from the sign review committee?
This is not from that requirement. This is from the prohibition of signs within the town.
Okay. Yeah. So we may get to this later on.
Okay.
You know, understanding that there's if you request a waiver from that requirement, that's perfectly reasonable. It's a good committee. And can be very helpful, I think, in helping you design an appropriate and eye-catching sign for your development. So it may just be something to consider to maybe do on a voluntary basis. Obviously, you're under no obligation, but I think it may be helpful for just a voluntary exercise to go through that sign review process.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. Let me just ask my fellow board members: are there any questions that anyone has on this sign waiver?
I do have a question. Is this sign meant to be for the commercial space, or is it Happy Acres apartments, or do we really need? I mean, it's not like there's a whole lot of stuff right there that you need a sign for. The apartment building that's there is the one you're going for. Is it even needed?
Go ahead, Scott.
I don't know if I've seen an actual sign detail, but because this is an apartment complex on the Parkway, we think it's kind of appropriate and kind of in keeping with this type of development use to have just an identification sign, which would identify, I guess, the project overall. Mr. Bosworth, I'm not sure if there'd be, we would be identifying the commercial uses as well on this sign.
Well, the intent was not to call out the commercial spaces for the reason that they could change hands. So the permanent sign in front is to clearly identify the apartment complex itself.
Right. So if the board granted that waiver, I assume there'd be some interaction between your design team, Mr. Bosworth, and the town and Tim, so that the sign would be appropriate and reasonable and
Yes, sir.
in keeping with good planning practices.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
It is pretty standard for a development like this to have some type of identification of the street.
Okay. Do you want to take item number 3, dealing with removal of earth materials?
Yes. So section 4A has a requirement that it be no removal and or deposit of earth materials except as may be authorized by the board. We're seeking to import and export earth materials for the purpose of constructing the building and or site redevelopment improvements. I note that within the conditions or the draft conditions within the decision, we are going to be required to provide the cut and fill as certified by the engineer of record. So we're seeking relief from that provision, but also there is a condition that kind of captures kind of what the actual cut and fill for the project will be. So.
And Tim, do you have any comments on this earth removal?
No comments, sir.
Okay, and Brian or Virginia, do you have any comments?
No comments.
Okay.
How
Great.
how much earth are they talking about? Is this something that even comes into our bylaw for prohibition or not?
I can probably speak to that, Virginia. It's going to be minimal. The majority of the material that's suitable will stay on site. The balance of the soils that come in will be essentially structural materials for under the building, under the parking lot, pipe structures. So as far as a bulk export, it's minimal. It's topsoil and some unsuitable materials.
Charlie, is there a way to kind of estimate what the maximum amount might be? Do you think that you could get that to me? Because if we add that to the waiver, I think that might address Ms. King's concerns or question, might answer it. But also, it's just the question of having a number in that waiver so we understand what the ultimate waiver means. You know, what does it mean? How much are we talking about? Can you give an estimate for that before the next meeting?
Absolutely.
That would be super.
Okay, that's great. How
Does
about,
that work for you?
absolutely.
Does that work for you, Mrs. King?
Yes, it does.
All right.
You want to address the height regulation waivers?
Yes, the next is for the building height. The maximum height is 2.5 stories or 35 feet, whichever is less. We're seeking a waiver. We're proposing a building which is 54 feet, 4 inches tall, 4 stories, plus the subgrade parking and accessory space below.
Tim, do you have any comment on this requested waiver?
Nope.
Okay, Mrs. King or Brian, do you have any comments or questions?
No questions.
Okay. Why don't you go to the next section, which deals with the area regulations, and perhaps you can talk more broadly on the area regulations, and we can handle the 3 or 4 of them kind of simultaneously without
Thank you.
without torturing everyone.
Yeah. So we're seeking waivers as a residential zone. We're typically seeing 1 residential dwelling unit per lot with setbacks, which are typical for a single family home. We're seeking waivers from, I guess, the requirement that there's only 1 dwelling unit per lot. We're also seeking a waiver from the front yard setback. We're exceeding that by only 3 feet. The side yard setback to the south side. And I won't get into the detail about how that is set, but we're seeking a waiver from the side yard setback. The building coverage, we're 3% over, and the gross floor area, we're exceeding that as well. And then the open space requirement, we are requiring a waiver from that to construct the project as well.
And I assume if you didn't receive these waivers, you couldn't construct the project as proposed. Is that
That is correct, Mr. Chairman.
okay? Let's see if Tim, do you have any comment on the area regulation waivers?
No comment.
Okay, Ginny or Brian, any questions or comments on the area regulation waivers?
I do not.
Mrs. King, not hearing from you, I
Oh,
assume.
I had a little no there.
Okay, that's great.
So yes, no.
All right, so we'll go over to page 2, dealing with the parking requirements. Mr. Golding, do you want to address the parking issues here in a kind of comprehensive way of doing it?
Yes. So as I said previously, this is zoned for residential. So we are seeking, there's not a multifamily that would be allowed within this zone in the first place. So we're providing 95 parking spaces for the 52 units. We're also proposing to construct 6 additional parking spaces for the walking trail to the conservation land that is adjacent. So we have those 2 separate. We're seeking waivers from the maximum curb cut size along the parkway for the northerly curb cut. Based on our discussion tonight, that actual width may change after this evening. We're also seeking a waiver of the parking space size, specifically for the interior spaces, as well as waiver from the screening requirements from the north side of the property for parking adjacent to the street. And then we're also seeking a waiver of the requirement that you provide sidewalks to pedestrian traffic ways, and that's specific to the waiver for the access and egress within the subgrade interior garage. So.
Okay, so I take it here that these waivers dealing particularly with curb cuts and access may be subject to an amendment based upon your conversations with Chief Madden and Mr. Zawinski.
That's correct. Yes, we would still require the waiver, but the actual kind of the relief, the actual dimension of the relief may change.
Okay, so that's we'll make a note of that. And we'll keep those issues outstanding. Let me see, Mrs. King, do you have any questions regarding the parking requirement waivers?
On the parking, I was wondering what the parking space size is going down to from, how much smaller is it?
So the requirement is 8.5 feet by 19. That's the requirement in the bylaw.
Mm-hmm.
We are going to be constructing conforming parking on the outside of the project. So within the outside parking areas, it's within the garage that we're seeking a waiver. Those are actually going to be 9 feet long, so longer, but they're going to be 9 feet wide, so a little bit wider, but they're not going to be quite as long. They're going to be 18 feet long. So it's a relatively de minimis
Okay,
waiver
Thank
we're
you.
seeking.
thank you.
Mr. Conley, do you have any questions on the parking waivers?
No, they answered my questions. Thanks.
Okay, great. I'm sorry, Tim, I bypassed you there. You have any questions on these parking requirement waivers?
No, sir.
Okay, great. Why don't we do section 8 dealing with administration and site plan approval?
Yes, we're just seeking a waiver from the requirement of a site plan approval. As the board's well aware, this is a comprehensive permit project, which allows for the board to weigh in on those issues. So.
And so in essence, the Board of Appeals and its peer reviewers would be engaged in that function as part of this process. Is that a fair way to put it?
That's correct, Mr. Chairman. Yes,
Rather than the planning board.
that's correct. Yes.
Okay, so let's, any questions, Mr. Conley and Mrs. King on?
No questions.
No,
Yeah, I think I heard you say no. And Tim, any comment here?
I think the Board of Appeals has done a fine planning board impression in this process. And so totally fine with this waiver from site plan approval.
Okay, thank you very much, Tim. Section 9, Board of Appeals.
Yes, that's a waiver from the potential requirement for any permits, variances, appeals, or relief from the zoning bylaw. Similar to the site plan review, this is a comprehensive permit project, which kind of brings multiple things within the jurisdiction of the board to review the project and grant relief where appropriate. So we're seeking a waiver.
I can't imagine having any discussion on this one, but let's ask Mr. Conley and Mrs. King. Any
No questions, Mr. Lennon.
Thank
no
you.
questions.
Okay, and Tim, I assume you have no questions on this one.
I'm all set.
Okay, great. How about section 10, dealing with other bylaws and regulations? This one is kind of very general, I guess, in all.
Yeah. So what are you proposing if you don't comply with the comprehensive permit?
I'm pulling up that section of the bylaw. Section 10, essentially, it's almost similar to the next one, which is penalty, which is 11. We're just seeking relief from requirement. We're certainly going to be required to comply with the terms and conditions of the comprehensive permit that will be granted. We're just seeking relief.
From what, from non-compliance with the zoning bylaw?
It's almost similar to the requirement for the waiver above it, which is from the requirement for variances or relief. Yeah, I viewed it the same way. That's why we're requesting that relief from that section.
I guess my question is, do you really need this?
Well, and just to make sure
Hmm.
so I think, isn't the point of this exercise that you're telling us every section of the zoning code that you need relief from, and we're deciding whether we agree? But are you actually saying in everything else in the zoning code or the town bylaws is also overridden, whether it's called out or not? Is that?
That was not my intention, Mr.
Yeah.
Conley. That was not what that was not the intent
Yeah.
of this relief. So,
We need to make that clear.
okay. I can work on that. I'll review that again. I know we're going to be meeting again, so.
I mean, the decision also says, anything that's not waived, they have to comply with. But I don't want to see the waivers somehow be inconsistent with that.
Certainly, I'll revisit that.
Okay, thanks, Scott. I should have thought about that more and I didn't, so my fault too.
That's all right. Now, dealing with the penalties, it's really the very similar analysis, isn't it, as to the previous one? It's penalties for violating the zoning bylaw.
Well, yeah, but John, the thing is that if there are aspects of the zoning bylaw with which they are going to comply because they haven't asked for a waiver, you wouldn't want to just grant them a blanket. They don't have to worry about complying with the zoning bylaw or dealing with any penalties therefrom, because they're required to comply with the bylaw except for the things that you're waiving.
Right, just sort of like if you had a variance from the zoning code, you wouldn't also need a variance from the penalties. You've
Right.
waived the zoning code to comply with your project, right?
That's
But the
correct.
penalties apply to what remains.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so you're content with this one, Judy, as it's written?
Well, I know, I'm just saying, I think this
No.
should be rewritten.
Oh, okay, all right.
Yeah, I think we're not waiving the penalties, actually. The
Yeah,
penalties
yeah.
should apply. There's unlikely to be penalties because we're waiving all of the items that they could violate. But, if we haven't identified something as being waived and something else, needed relief, they either have to come back to the board or, have some consequence. So I don't think we just generally waive penalties.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think you should do that.
So this requires further refinement from.
Yeah, we can talk about it, Scott. I just don't want to see this kind of blanket.
No, I understand
I
your
think you
concern
said
and
it.
the board's concern, certainly.
Okay.
I was just seeking, obviously, to be comprehensive, and it
That's
maybe
fine,
was
yeah.
a little bit over comprehensive.
That's okay. That's all right.
Scott, why don't you address the waiver regarding local wetland bylaws?
Yes, we're seeking a waiver of the wetlands bylaw and the rules and regulations in their entirety. The proposed project will conform with the Massachusetts Wetland Protection Act, which is what we applied to the Conservation Commission for a permit for. So this is similar to kind of other prior permits and approvals for 40B within the town. That's where that language for that waiver came from.
Okay. Tim, do
So
you have any comments on this? Judy, go ahead, pick up the ball.
my only question is, in what ways is the project not complying with the wetlands bylaw? Usually it's not a blanket like this. Usually it's, exempt from specific provisions of the wetlands bylaw, because you're right that you applied to Concom under 131 section 40, But that's because in a comprehensive permit, this board sits in the role of the Conservation Commission. So the question is, what is this board waiving under the local wetlands bylaw? I don't think your project across the board fails to comply with the local bylaw.
I would agree with that, Ms. Barrett. Yes. Certainly this, I included this waiver because that's similar to prior relief granted for other projects that have been approved in the town. I understand what you're saying. I do not have an answer for you right now. I can certainly look into that, and Mike Joyce is not on right now as well. And so, but that's something we can certainly revisit prior to the next
Yeah.
meeting
Yeah.
and kind of give more specificity.
Yeah, if he could just, I'm sorry.
No,
John.
no. I mean, Judy, I think your point is we didn't say waiver from compliance with the zoning code. We said waiver from these, 10 or so items under the zoning code. So similarly for the local, wetlands bylaw, would call out what it is you need relief from, and we can, review and confirm that.
That's right.
I think that's the right approach.
Yep, that's right.
Yeah. And then I guess just while we're on this kind of topic of it, just to quickly revisit the, I think it was number 9, section 9. I think we're approving or not having any questions on the waiver for permits, variance, appeals, and relief. And I think what you meant is you don't have to take the procedural step just for these specific items you brought before us.
Right.
You're not saying you don't have to seek variances, waivers for some other forms of relief, right? Yeah.
Certainly.
Okay. Great.
Yep.
Yep. Okay. Thank you.
Tim, do you want to weigh in on this wetlands issue?
I agree with Judy. I think a little bit more clarification would be good just for the sake of completeness.
Okay, I also agree with Judy. It's usually very unwise not to agree with Judy.
Sometimes, a project so closely conforms that it's good for people to see how little relief you're actually asking for.
And the last one here is a stormwater management waiver. You want to waive the stormwater management bylaw in its entirety.
Yeah.
Then you say the review of the stormwater management for the proposed process is part of the comprehensive permit process.
Right. It's the same issue. What under the stormwater bylaw is being waived? I think our engineer can just tell you this. I think they can in 5 minutes.
We will revisit that issue as well
Yeah.
prior to the next hearing.
Thank you.
Tim, do you have any comment on this last waiver on the stormwater management issue?
Same as before. I agree with Judy.
Okay, great. So,
And
I'm sorry.
Mr. Chairman, can I just revisit, just continue the discussion on one of the earlier points we had, just to share a thought. We talked about the earth materials earlier,
Yep.
section 4A. And I think it's a good idea, a good request to ask for some information, about what the expectations are. But, taking soil off the site or bringing soil to the site just adds cost to the developer. They've got no incentive to do any more than is necessary. And so I don't think I'd want to impose conditions here. It would be hard, I think, to monitor and measure and whatnot. So it might be helpful to know, but I think we're sort of aligned with the applicant and having that be the least possible. So I think informationally it'd be helpful, but I don't know that I'd want to feel a need to condition that waiver on an amount.
That's interesting. I guess I'm so, my tendency with these is to just make them as specific as possible. So if there's a problem later, it's really the applicant's problem. But this is it's a matter of style for you guys. I understand what you're saying.
Yeah,
but-
I mean, I think my view would be if the applicant thought they needed a certain number of cubic yards to build this project we've all looked at, and it turned out they needed a few extra cubic yards. Like, I don't think any of us think that. I wouldn't think that warrants an application to the zoning board for a further waiver or an amendment of a comprehensive permit. From my point of view, I think that there's no incentive for the applicant to do any more than is necessary. And so, and I think that would be, I don't know how the building inspector would measure that. So in any event, I think it's helpful maybe just to set expectations, but I don't know that we need to impose a cap that they have to manage to in case, the math turns out not to be what they expected.
Yep, I think that makes a lot of sense. Ginny, do you want to be heard on that issue?
I still feel that we need to have a number that we're kind of zeroing in on. Plus or minus could be added to it, but I think we need to have some kind of a number.
Charlie said he could do it. Charlie said he thought he could provide the
yes.
estimate. I don't want to speak for Charlie. Charlie, didn't you say that? Did you say you thought you could provide an estimate? Or my
Yes, we can provide our cut and fill numbers. That's an easy exercise to perform. But as Brian mentioned, it behooves us to leave as much material on site,
Sure.
which is always the intent. In construction processes, you have weather, you have rain, you have frost, you have snow, which will all affect the volume that is the actual volume in the end. Some soils become unsuitable because of weather, which then have to go off the site. I think when you try and target a volume, it'd be virtually impossible for the town to track because you'd have to be there 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, because it doesn't all go off on a Tuesday and the rest all come in on a Wednesday. It's a process during the entire project. So we can provide the cut and fill numbers to alleviate the board's concern that there's not some massive amount going off or coming in. But as the applicant, I would request that there's some understanding that there are other elements that drive the overall number at the end.
And I do understand that, and I appreciate your explanation, Charlie. But I do think perhaps if we try to plus or minus some amount that is reasonable, we could have some number specific that's got a range.
Yeah, that's easily done.
Thank you.
Great. Then that solves that problem. And, thanks, Mr. Bosworth. I think we've covered the waivers. Let me just ask, is there any member of the public present who has any question on these waivers? I know they're very, very technical and require knowledge of the various bylaws and construction principles and practices, but is there any, just to make sure nobody's suffering in silence, is there any member of the public out there who wants to be heard on the question of waivers? Bev, what do we have here? Okay, that's nobody present, and that's fine. And I assume from what was said that Mr. Golden will be dealing interactively with Judy and trying to put these in final form for final approval, and including any access, the width of access roads and all of that are of concern to Fire Chief Madden as well. And we can get that right up here.
And we'll work with Tim as well and make sure from the town's point of view that it's okay. I don't expect a problem. I just want a little more specificity in this.
Okay, I agree with you. And let me just ask both Brian Connolly and Ginny King, do you have any more comments or additional comments on the waiver issue here?
I think I've said enough.
Okay. Well,
I don't have I don't have anything further, Mr. Chair.
Okay, great. So that's about as far as we can go on the issue of waivers. Let me ask you, Judy, what do you have on your agenda, if anything?
Well, I didn't know if the board had a chance to review the draft decision. I mean, it's gone through a couple of changes. I can't say anything big has changed, but some of the stuff's been reorganized. The building inspector was wonderful and, walked me through the other day some things he thought could come out of the decision. I think he's trying to make sure that what's building code is building code and stays with the building department, and which makes sense to me. So we did remove a couple of conditions, but they're all building code related. I don't think it's anything substantive that the board would need to worry about. And I had Johanna Schneider review it, and she gave me a few but minor changes, which I incorporated. Essentially what I've been doing as I edit this is I have a little table in the back that's indicating what the changes were from version to version, so people will know who weighed in. And, I think that I'm happy to generate a clean copy of this. I realize I just sent another version of this out, but I've been trying not to flood you with multiple revisions and then create a lot of confusion. but I didn't know if you, even without seeing any of the edits, I didn't know if you had any comments on the draft decision.
Well, I did read it, and I really have to tell you, I thought it was well done. It was understandable, important. And I thought the waivers are very technical things and difficult to comprehend unless you have 15 or 20 years experience like Mr. Golding and you have. I kind of liked your formatting because you seem reluctant to put a lot of interlineations there in different colors and all of that. But from my perspective, as a non-builder, non-engineer layman, I thought they were very, very helpful in seeing the refinements that you're making in the draft decision. And I do have to admit it's somewhat exhausting to read it in one session, which I did do. But no, I think you're heading in the right direction. I applaud your multiple drafts. It reminds me of thinking of Mr. Golding putting together these waivers. It can be, it's very, very important, but it also can be very tedious and very, very technical. And it's very important that it's done well and done right. And I thought you're in the right direction. And I think it's, to be frank, from my perspective, it's much more sophisticated work product than I could put out.
That's not true.
With the lot
Yeah.
Not true.
So I think your draft decision is a blessing. What do you think, Mr. Conley?
So I actually haven't seen a further draft since your first draft, Judy. But I mean, the first draft was obviously very thorough, and so I haven't gotten the benefit of all the substantive additions you've made. So I'd like to see that and be happy to weigh in after that.
You know what I think I'll do to make everybody's life easier? I think that I'm on version 5 right now. And I think what I'm going to do is get rid of the red line. I'll just accept the changes, but I'll highlight where the changes were made. So when you see this so-called clean draft, it will still have highlighting in it where things were changed, and that will make it easier for you to compare it to the first draft. But you
Great.
want to wade through all this red line, which frankly, I absolutely cannot stand. But I know sometimes people want it, so I did it that way. But God, it's awful. It makes a mess out of an outline structure, right? Because the numbering gets all screwed up. So if that's all right with you guys, and Scott, you as well, why don't I just handle it that way? So that any changes will be highlighted in yellow, all the red line will be gone. If there's something I think that the board or the applicant still needs to deal with, I'll put it in a footnote.
And Judy, has the applicant had a chance to review and provide comments to you on it?
They actually did. Yeah, they provided, Scott gave me some
Okay.
comments, and you know, may have.
So right. So it looks like a decision that's going to reflect all the comments from our peer review, the comments in the board discussions,
Yep.
and is going to be acceptable to the developer, right?
Yeah,
Great.
so that's my goal.
Great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Jenny?
And I would,
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. I would just note that we've had the chance to kind of review the new version as well, and I think we are generally in agreement. We have a couple of things that we would like to kind of discuss.
Sure.
We submitted additionally architectural plans that changed the unit configuration, so I just want to, I'll send that number to you just so we get that correct. And
Yeah. And you know what else I need from you, Scott or Charlie, before we actually put this in final form? The very first condition is a list of the plans that we are calling the plans of record.
Mhm.
I'm leaving it to you to give me those sheet names and the revision dates so that you know this decision is correct from your point of view. I just worry about, you know, did I miss something along the way? So it's your call. You give me the revision dates and the name of the plan and the preparer of the plan, and I'll take care of getting that table in there. Because we need to really clearly tie this to, here's the plan that's being approved for purposes of this decision.
Certainly, we'll get that to you.
Thank you. That's great.
Great. Mrs. King, do you have any comments or questions regarding the present status of the draft?
I haven't been able to look at the latest one. I've had a crush of work these last couple of weeks, but nothing that I can bring up right now.
That's fine.
I look forward to looking at it without the redlining. Thank you, Judy.
I hate it. Oh, God, I hate it. That's fine. I'll do that. I'll do it this weekend when it's quiet.
Well, you're a lot of fun on the weekends.
Oh, I'm terrible.
Well, we appreciate your efforts because it's I know the schedule that you keep during the week, and I'd love to see you have at least one day on the weekend when you can enjoy the rain of the summer season. But we appreciate your effort. It's
No problem. Well, part of what I'm trying to do, John, is get to the point where we have a format that's consistent from decision to decision.
Yep.
That's sort of part of my goal. So I've been sharing it with Jeff Mullen too.
well, that's great. Jeffrey's a terrific
Yeah, he's awesome. He's good.
acting chairman, and he's a terrific technician when it comes to these issues. And I think that unfortunately that writing a decision on that particular matter, we may have to send you to Hawaii or something. That's going to be enormously.
It's gonna be hard.
I hope your husband helps you on these decisions.
So he just doesn't even want to hear about it.
I'm glad this decision is making the progress that
Yeah.
it is making. What else do we have to cover, if anything, at this particular hearing? My notes say nothing.
Well, I guess the only question I would have is, other than the waivers that we know Scott's going to tweak a little bit and put some more specificity in, is the board okay with the other waivers? I just want to make that sort of clear for the
Well,
record.
I think we are. Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Brian or Jenny,
Yeah, no, I mean, I think we just gave some feedback, right? So I think they have to be, I don't know if there's another vote, but I mean, as long as it's consistent with the comments we just gave, then, I think we support, I support all the waivers.
Okay, super.
as do I, and I think Mrs. King with her suggestions.
Yeah, that's fine.
Anything else we want to cover tonight, or shall we call it an evening and adjourn over to the 19th?
Call it an evening.
Okay. Mr. Conley, do you agree with that?
I do.
Okay, Mrs. King, you in agreement?
There's a motion, if there's a motion out there.
Mr. Golding, is that fine with you and Mr. Brodsky?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Okay, and Mr. Bosworth has been very helpful here. That's convenient for you, Mr. Bosworth, and your team.
Scott, we need another extension letter from you, I think.
Okay.
I think that I'm sorry, John, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but it just hit me. I believe the extension we have right now expires like tomorrow. So could you please give us another extension of the 180 days to the day after the next hearing? Can you do that
Yes.
tomorrow? Thank you.
Okay, so I think I heard a motion to adjourn this hearing until August 19th at 7 o'clock in the evening, and I think I heard a second from Mr. Conley. Do you have, okay, so all those in favor of continuing this to the 19th at 7 p.m.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye, so there we have it. It's 8:21, and
Very good.
want to thank everybody for their time and their excellent presentations, working on these highly technical matters and making some sense out of them. And look forward to you working with Judy Barrett and the fire chief in the interim period of time, and see if we can make a lot of progress towards possibly wrapping this up within the next hearing or two. So thank you, folks, and see you on the 19th at 7 o'clock.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Night.
Bye-bye, Bev. Thank
Good
you.
night.